Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Social Network, starring Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, Justin Timberlake, Armie Hammer, and Max Minghella, directed by David Fincher. Now, I went to go see this in theaters because I thought it was something to do with Facebook, but let's get into the movie and we'll see how much this has something to do with Facebook. I don't think it does, but we'll talk about it. We open with Mark Zuckerberg, played by Jesse Eisenberg, and Erica Albright, played by Rooney Mara, talking in a restaurant, and Jesse Eisenberg talks way too fast in this scene that I can't understand a damn thing he's saying. And he does pull off Mark Zuckerberg, aka the inventor of Facebook, very well, as Mark and Erica break up in the restaurant, and she bails out of the restaurant because Mark is so delusional, and he's an asshole, sure, that he goes back to his dorm room as he goes to Harvard University in 2003 and writes a blog about Erica and how much she's a and explains how much of a bitch she is. And he creates a game website called Face Smash while drunk out of his mind, which is which girls to like. Let me just give it an example. You know how back in the day when you have to pick a girl, which one's hottest and all that, and the music in this scene is working pretty damn well. Only friend, I'll say, Eduardo Saverin, played by Andrew Garfield, before he was ever Spider-Man, enters this as this was before he was ever Spider-Man, like I said, and I like him much better here than he was in Spider-Man, as they send Face Smash all over the world and get 22,000 hits or viewers or something, and Harvard professors shut it down while we go back and forth from back then to today, and he has two lawsuits going on. One is between Mark and Eduardo, and the other is between Mark and Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, both played by Armie Hammer. Although one of them, I think it was Tyler with the face, is also played by Armie Hammer. I can't explain it. And they're suing him for stealing their website and Eduardo for blocking him as the co-founder of Facebook, or should I say CFO, excuse me, which will come back later in the film. The next morning in 2003, Mark is in trouble and bails on class and meets the Winklevosses, as as well as Divya. Let me see if I'm saying this name right. Nardendra, I think so, played by Max Minghella, whom I just saw recently in Spiral, as they recruit him to. They create a website like MySpace, for example. Mark goes to Eduardo with the idea of the website while at a party at the university, as it was Caribbean night, as it's 20 degrees outside. As Mark says to Eduardo, it's exclusive, as he thought it was a great idea, and joins along in the invention of the website. And the script is smart and very well written by Aaron Sorkin, who also wrote and directed, of course, The Trial of the Chicago 7. And he's such a good writer as I'm a fan of his. Mark ditches the Winklevosses meetings repeatedly, as the pacing in this movie is much tighter than Zodiac and Benjamin Button, in my opinion. And the lawsuit scenes are tremendously acted very well, as this movie is very well acted. Mark invents a website called The Facebook, as it's calling it for now, as we move on to the year 2004, as Mark has an idea on creating relationship status on the Facebook. And people do admittedly not say everything about themselves, because sometimes social media is unsafe, which I don't think the character knew about back then. Divya sees the Facebook on the computer invented by Mark, as he tells the Winklevosses Mark stole the website from them, as they need a Harvard University club pass, which he doesn't, which makes him a hacker, which makes sense as the movie is well acted and very well made. And this is a 2-hour movie, and the editing as well as the pacing is very well tight, as I'm not bored whatsoever, as I'm enjoying myself watching this movie. And kudos to David Fincher for making a movie not only about Facebook, but a lawsuit of who's the creator of Facebook. Eduardo meets Christy, played by Brenda Song, as she and her friend Alice wants to have drinks with Eduardo and Mark has a letter that Eduardo reads about the, let me see if I'm saying this right, Nardendra Winklevoss website, as it could lead him to a lawsuit, which it did eventually, And the acting is very well done, like I said, and the performances are mesmerizing. Mark sees Erica at a restaurant as he wants to with her about his behavior back then, but she refuses to leave the table with her friends, which I would do if I dated a psycho like that. During the lawyer scene, Mark is reintroduced to Marilyn Delpy, played by Rashida Jones, whom I first became familiar with in I Love You Man, which was where I recognized her from. The Paul Rudd Jason Segel bromance film. Does anybody remember that? I mean, I would too. Devia and the Winklevoss want to make a meeting with the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, and I'll talk about the next segment. We meet with Sean Parker, played by Justin Timberlake, waking up on the bed of Amy, played briefly by Dakota Johnson before she was ever in 50 Shades of Grey, as he checks his emails and sees the Facebook and wants to find Mark Zuckerberg. And I like Justin Timberlake in this movie, as he works great for what briefly he does in this movie. The Winklevosses have a meeting with Larry Summers as they want to talk with Mark about the website, and unfortunately it doesn't work out until Mark, I'll say, and Tyler breaks the doorknob on purpose, which was pretty funny. Eduardo and Mark with Christy set up a meeting with Sean Parker where Eduardo phrases it as a Shaunathon, which kind of funny because I'll get into it. And Sean does come off like a dick to Eduardo and says drop the from the title and just call it Facebook. And the character is unlikable, but I do like Justin Timberlake in this movie, as he has attitude in these scenes he's in throughout the movie, and talks Mark into coming to California. And the scene is well shot, and as I do enjoy it, they bring up the briefings of Eduardo torturing a chicken as animal cruelty, which is one scene that could be in the editing room, despite it's a very tight movie. Mark decides to go to California because everything is in California, while he hires interns to work at Facebook from a hijacking drinking game, and Eduardo gets an $18,000 while living in New York and for the summer, as Sean comes by the house, and he lives across the street as they go to a club together. And the movie gives a good case on who Mark Zuckerberg is, and it does a good job showing his point of view with Eduardo and Sean. Mark asks Sean to live with him and his crew. Meanwhile, the Winklevoss twins row the boat as a race occurs between Harvard and an Italian university, as they lost the race, and they, with Devia, decided to sue Mark in federal court for the Facebook incident, which makes sense, and why we went back and forth as it makes perfect sense. Eduardo enters Mark and Sean's place as Eduardo waits for Mark for an hour at the airport as he's pissed at Mark, as Sean lives with Mark and torments Eduardo as he's dealing with a crazy Christie, and Eduardo is getting rather infuriated as he goes back to New York while Sean sets up meetings for Mark and Christie. Comes home to Eduardo and he gives her a present, as Eduardo gets a call from Mark, and Christy burns her present for her, as Eduardo gets good news from Mark, as he has an office in a building in San Francisco to get his ass back there, and goes to a meeting where he signs for his termination of him, as he didn't know at the time, as the CFO of Facebook, as Eduardo didn't know it at the time, which is a kiss of death, as he tells Eduardo they need to have a business meeting. As it turns out, Eduardo is terminated, and he yells at Mark and tells him to get ready to lawyer up, as he'll get everything, and Mark loses Eduardo as a friend forever and crosses 1 million members during Facebook, which is a success from Mark, and the cinematography in that scene is very well shot. Sean has a party at the house with the cocaine as the cops arrive and say the party is over, as he goes in a room with underage kids, and they with Sean get arrested. We go back to the end of the day with the lawyers taking off and Mark using the computer for a little bit, as Marilyn says to Mark, "You're not an asshole, you're trying so hard to be." And he advises to pay the lawsuits and adds Erica as a friend on Facebook who said Mark is an asshole at the beginning of the movie. And he looks to see if Erica will accept his friend request as the movie ends, and the climax is very gripping. As what the hell did Marilyn mean when she said to Mark is trying so hard to be an asshole, as it hooked me to the point I didn't want the movie to end at this point. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.4 out of 10. This movie is well shot as it's well made, and the performances are good, despite they come off as dickish. The cinematography is great to look at, and there's only one brief scene that they could have edited out, but overall, it's a tight movie with a decent script. And I didn't want this movie to be over when Marilyn says to Mark when he's trying so hard to be an asshole. And that's the David Fincher I missed the most when it comes to him making a movie, despite this is a drama. But the point of view character at the end of the day is Mark Zuckerberg, despite he's an asshole, and Jesse Eisenberg pulls that off very well. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Gone Girl. And yes, I did do that Dragon Tattoo remake, as well as Alien 3 and those other ones. But when I get back to Gone Girl, you're not an asshole, Mark. You're trying so hard to be.